Hi, welcome to Cinema Then, Cinema Now, the film series with lively discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach cinema studies at the College of Staten Island of the City University of New York. This week we continue our 10-part survey of the last 25 years of Latin American cinema. We'll be seeing our single entry today from Chile, the 1973 film The Promised Land, directed by Miguel Littín. This film, an explicitly political one, comes from the Allende years of Chile. We'll be talking about those years, the conditions of Chilean filmmaking at that time and since, with our two guests, in fact, both Chilean filmmakers, Sergio Castilla and Andres Racz. They'll be with us after the film. Now, enjoy The Promised Land. Hi, welcome back to Cinema Then, Cinema Now. I hope you enjoyed Miguel Littín's The Promised Land, a very interesting film from Chile in 1973, from a very particular period in the history of that country, and also from a particular period, you might say, in the history of Latin American filmmaking. There's a lot to discuss, and we'll get on to that in just a minute after I've had the opportunity to introduce to you today's two guests, both of whom are Chilean filmmakers. Sitting to my left is Sergio Castilla. Sergio is a writer, director, and producer who has spent some time teaching film in his day. He has produced and directed a number of documentaries as well as 3 feature films. These include The Story, The Disappeared, and Gentile alouette. He's currently, in fact, producing his first feature film in America, which is provisionally titled Give Me 5, and will be shot in Spanish Harlem. Sitting to my right, another Chilean filmmaker, is Andres Racz. Andres is a filmmaker who specializes in films in and about Chile. He is, like many directors, also a producer. Seems like the two have to go hand in hand these days. Some people who are watching the show may have in fact seen his documentary that was at one point shown, I believe, on CUNY TV, and that is When the People Awake. He has directed as well several shorts and will be back in Chile covering the elections in that country with his documentary cameras. Andres, all these things would qualify you as someone who has something to say about this very interesting film, but you have a more direct connection with the film because you're credited as one of the assistant directors of The Promised Land. If you will, please tell us a little bit about how this film came to be made and what it was like in the making of this film.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing that strikes me in watching the film is that it was a totally premonitory film of what was going to happen a few months after we finished shooting.
Right, because the coup against Allende comes only a couple of months after the shooting.
After the shooting. Even the actress of the film, Carmen Bueno, is dead. Is disappeared,
Okay.
So was one of the cameramen, Jorge Miller. So for me to watch it 15 years after is very strong. The film came about, Littín was interested, as were most of filmmakers in Latin America at that time, in trying to reflect what was going on in Chile between 1970 and 73.
Right.
The story is picked from a real story that happened in the 30s in Chile, where peasants took our land and
Right.
then they were murdered. With this story of Ranquil, which is the place where this happened, which is very well known in Chile, everybody knows about the Ranquil massacre. Miguel tried to do a parody, an analogy to the
Right.
Chilean situation of 73, the problem of the government, of power, of the rights of the peasants, you know, versus what you would have called in the 60s, you know, the bourgeoisie.
Right.
I don't know, I don't think we use that terminology anymore,
Right.
you know, but at that time that was the way we saw things. So it reflects, I think, very well that thing. It also is, in a way, a synthesis of a moment in Latin American cinema. Aesthetically, a film, I think, in a way closes a cycle, you know, which was started by Rocha in Brazil, by San
Cinema
Ginés
Novo
in Bolivia,
Right.
by Miguel and other people in Chile. And I think it has a lot of influence of Cinema Novo, you know. And I would say also Red Salm of Changso had a
yes.
big effect on Miguel, you know, for this film, and you can see it. So the political, the aesthetical, and then it's based on, and very rigorous in that sense, in popular Chilean popular art,
Yes.
you know, the music, on the old songs of the payadores in the countryside of Chile, the iconography, the popular iconography of the Virgin del Carmen,
Yes.
you know, of the soldiers. We did a study too. We went to newspapers, a newspaper called La Lira Popular, which was dated at the beginning of the century. It was in that sense, it was very rigorously done. The production, of course, was poor.
Right.
You know, we did it on a string. We shot 9 months in the countryside, with very few resources and mostly with dedication, you know,
Right.
and commitment. Like we're done, you know, the other films like Sergio's film, you know, and Patricio Guzmán, The Battle of Chile, and the other films that express that period. You know, it was hard to do.
Now, but in this particular period, even if you're shooting on a shoestring, how does a film like this get financed? Was this?
I recall that Miguel and we were both trying to do a feature at
Okay.
that time, and we were both knocking at the same doors, and sometimes sitting side by side, waiting for a banker to receive us. Where some institutions where we could ask for money, we were trying to convince them. Sometimes I would get angry and he would try to calm me down. He would get angry and I would try to calm him down. So it was like asking for money. It was a sort of we would go to some enterprise organizations that would give credits to foment film industry. Then there were the banks that would lend money. And you needed a collateral,
Right. Yes.
because it didn't matter how during this period they tried to help the industry. The banks always kept on functioning the same way,
Right.
with collaterals. So what we would do is share collaterals, and we would. I remember, for example, that I grabbed I borrowed 15 or 20 photo cameras. And I went to a bank and I said, look, this is what I have. So they would take the numbers of the photo cameras and then we would sort of say, well, this is more or less, $5,000 or $10,000, and we're going to lend you 6 or 7.
Okay.
So the problem was to pay the first monthly payments. So it was done in a very, in any which way you can, you know.
It was done, I would say, you know, very little cash,
Yeah.
you know, very small percentage of the total production budget is cash, and I would say a lot of commitment
Okay.
of people, you know, and in this case, I know for sure, you know, many people work for free. They didn't get paid at all. They worked because they liked the idea, because they liked they were excited about doing films in Chile, which is a principal force in Latin American productions, you know.
Well, that sort of brings, you both, I'm sure, have something to say about this, about how the atmosphere changed for Chilean filmmaking in the Allende years. I mean,
Well,
it
the
changed.
doors
It
opened.
changed in the sense that it looked like we could do more things, but practically,
yeah.
the means were not there. You know,
Okay.
there were more things, but so you wanted to do them, and there were more cameras, but basically everything was supplied. Everything that really we gave effort, and work
Okay.
and work. As Andres says, a lot of people working with no money. And I must say that the same thing happens here,
Yeah.
where you have, let's say, an idle capacity, you have how many idle cameras you have here, how
Right.
many idle labs, idle this, idle that. But at the same time, here, when you shoot a low-budget movie, whether it's this one or that man or that filmmaker, the same thing. It's like effort and commitment, and the team, the crew, the motivation, the director, the producer, 3 or 4 people who get together and start the thing going. I would say even the great movies, the big movies, $15 million movies, it's not the money that's going to make the thing, you know, it's other things. Of course, we would have loved to have the money, and it's always good to have the money. But what makes the difference between any film and a film is the commitment, you know, of the people, that extra thing. A star like one of the guys you have behind here, in this movie is going to be average.
Right.
In the other movie is going to be great. So I think that sort of momentum that people have, that people get, was what we had in those years. Everybody had momentum.
Yes.
There was no money, no this. The cameras made a lot of noise. I heard about this, the shooting of the movie. I was in Santiago at the time, so rumors would come and say it rained for 2 months. The decors all they built up has gone down.
Right.
Those are the rumors. I belong to the film community, so. And then I would see Littín that he would have a pain in his back, and he was lying on the bed. I'd say, "I can't move, and the locations are inundated, and there's no more water," whatever, you know.
Also, one has to underline, you know, that obviously during the Allende years, I would say the last 2 years of the 1969, 1970 to 1973 has been, production-wise, the richest period in the history of filmmaking in Chile. There's no doubt about it.
Yes, yes.
You know, Raúl Ruiz made at least 5 features.
Right.
Sergio did 2 films.
Right.
Littín did 2 films. Patricio Guzmán did 4 films, Patricio Guzmán, plus hundreds of documentaries for the TV, which was the state channel was
Right.
in the in the hands of the government. Chile Films was in the side of the government, so they did lots of films, some good, some bad, you know, whatever.
Right, right.
But people were working in films. After the coup, the situation changed drastically. We were perceived, because Chile is a very politicized country, extremely politicized, I would say, like Italy, you know.
Right.
Italy would be the more similar country, I would say, in that sense. So we immediately became the target, you know, the enemy of the military junta. And half of the filmmakers had to, I would
well,
say
yes.
75% had to seek asylum in embassies. And they were being looked to be shot, you know.
Yeah.
That's the fact. And the ones that were left had to learn, you know, how to do advertising.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
and that's what they've been doing most of the years. Lately, there's been another resurgence, because art, and especially filmmaking, I won't say art, because maybe literature you can write, you know, in a dictatorship, underground and all
Right.
that. But
In a room alone,
filmmaking,
right.
but filmmaking, it's a public enterprise where you have to, you know, it's known and has to do with democracy, with resources in the case of Chile. And those years were very inspirational, and I think marked every one of us, you know, no matter where we work. Sergio works
Well,
in New York, you know, Raúl Ruiz works
Right.
in Paris,
But,
Guzmán works in Spain, but that period really marked us all, was like the beginning, you know.
Yeah. It also is it's a moment where, as I was saying, a lot of things seemed possible. Of course, we were much younger, and it seems that the enthusiasm explodes in those years for us. On the other hand, I think that at the same time we were trying to do things no matter how or no matter what, and that meant in many times looking to other places in those years were doing things no matter what, no matter how.
Yes.
For us, like
Right.
the Nouvelle Vague in France,
Right.
which had meant a real rupture with the idea of making a film in Hollywood, which meant to make it in a studio with a lot of money and with heavy cameras, and the Germans had invented this light camera and the lights, and people could shoot in a place like that little corner or inside real apartments. So all these things also made it possible. You know, it's not only that it's suddenly possible because in one country, it's like the whole there's a whole kind of situation that makes it possible. Even like people in Chile said, screenplays, for example. Nobody thought of writing a screenplay. A lot of people didn't write screenplays. I think I made a feature with no screenplay. I'm not going to do that again. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
But at that time, the Nouvelle Vague Godard was saying, no more screenplays. I write my screenplays in the subway. I just need to write a few lines of dialogue before I go again to the location, to the apartment I'm shooting. All that is, I think also that was sort of a limit, and sooner or later we would have realized, hey, wait a minute here, there are certain things that we all must know.
Right.
And screenwriting and a screenplay is a screenplay. You're going to have a screenplay, you know, and there are structures, and movies come from a lot of movies. I mean, it's not that you can invent a movie from zero. The more movies you watch, starting from when the movie started, it's going to be best for you, you know, and that must not be like a constraint. Oh, if I don't have this must make it possible. But the more you know about movies, the better you'll make a movie, and the better you will use what you have, these 3 glasses of water and these 3 chairs, because there are scenes in the movie history that have been using just this, you know.
Now, speaking of knowing movies, I'm curious how your films, Littín's films, the films of other Chilean filmmakers were received in the country at that time itself. I mean, was this seen by audiences? I mean, because audiences, receive films, and one of the complaints I've heard from many Latin American filmmakers is that sometimes they make films that are highly regarded rather, in Europe, or even if they're seen modestly in the United States here, but they were not seen by as many people in their own countries as they wish because of...
Yeah, in this case, a lot of movies were not finished, so they were never shown.
Let's put it this way: the only film of that time that was a box office success, and it still holds the record for a Chilean film, and one of the, not only for a Chilean film, but for one of the biggest grossing films in the history of theater projection in Chile, is The Jackal of Nahuel Toro, which is Littín's first film.
Okay.
At the time was playing with Zorba the Greek,
right?
And Littín, it's true. They went more to see The Jackal of Nahuel Toro. Was like in 12 theaters. Then the films of this period were not seen. The coup came. They're forbidden films. Sergio's film is forbidden. The Battle of Chile is forbidden.
Right.
The Promised Land is forbidden. They do circulate in Chile in the alternative, video channels that have been created, and there are many. I don't know how many thousands of people. We cannot count it, but I'm sure thousands have seen the films. Everybody knows The Promised Land in Chile. Everybody knows Disappeared Prisoner that Sergio did. The documentaries, The Promised Land, etc. They are known, but we cannot quantify it. It's totally underground.
But to mention, to comment on something you said, is like I recall, for example, that I did a documentary about women called Mijita, which is a sort of translation, free translation would mean baby.
Right.
A documentary about women who live in shanty towns, and about women who live in shanty towns, work at home, and also in factories. So they do double thing, you know. And this was a 16mm movie, and I didn't have a means of showing it in cinemas because blowing up, and there were no shorts of this kind. So what I did was to grab a 16mm projector, some loudspeakers, and took it first of all to the shanty town where it was shot. Reaction, like people were sitting, and I had like, I don't know, around 100 people in a small house, and I was projecting it like in, you know, a small.
That's the way
16.
we do it today.
And then
But
what
with
happened?
video.
What happened was that the people who were the playing in the movie, the characters of the movie. This was a documentary.
Right.
And the neighbors who knew these people didn't see the people as characters. They saw them as people. So there was look at that, and look at this one, and look at that. So I realized that the first thing is that one is very difficult to see yourself, you know, as besides in a very minimal way, like you see yourself like totally cut from what you are, like you're not you, but you're just the guy that walks in and out from here, you know, but you're not somebody who's doing something part of a community, part of a nationality, and meaning this and meaning that. So so I had to show it for a second time. And the second time, they were characters.
Okay.
They became characters. And I think this is very important because the fact is that there are very few Chilean movies with Chilean characters. And it's like never seeing yourself, you know? Like you are a human being because you know you are, and there are other things than besides movies that tell you're a human being. There are other human beings that tell you are human beings, right? But the thing is that you got to see your image sometimes on a TV set. You got to hear your voice sometimes on a radio, or see yourself on a screen, up on a screen. And that was a problem because a lot of people, most of the people, the whole country, has very seldom seen themselves in images or heard themselves more because radio had more development. But up on a screen, it was like the people were other people, you know, and they spoke other languages and so on. And I think this was a moment when people wanted to see themselves somehow.
I think there is something very important about the Promised Land, which we could say also that I like the film very much. I'm part of the film, you know, and I think it's a film that is one of the best achieved mixed of what became what today is a pastiche, really, which is magical realism. Was the beginning, you know, of that. Few films had explored that, and I think Littín did a very good job, you know, because in the film it is a mixture of neorealism, you know, documentary, and with suddenly the Virgin appearing, suddenly, you know, dead people in the river, and that I think in that sense, you know, it is a landmark film.
Well, also, one of the things that struck me, I mean, as the outsider in watching the film, in which the film is this collage, as you said, or this mosaic of many cultural materials.
A fresco would call Littín the film. That's what Littín likes to call his films frescoes. And I think this is one of his best frescoes, by the way.
Yeah.
You know,
I should also comment on something we were talking about a little bit earlier about, you know, how low the budget of the film was. It's made out of commitment. I don't think that the fact that this is a low-budget film shows up in the film.
No, the production values are very good, you know, and it's an expensive film. The thing is that is how you pay for the production values, you know.
Yeah, but it is a fresco, but it is meant as a kind of epic of a moment, and it has that feel.
It was a big
about
production. We had 80 horses on the set. At any time, we had, you know, 100 peasants. The little town was built.
Right.
Was totally built. Every one of the houses was built. You know, you had the army, which were, you know, I recall 50 military people, 60. It was a complication. We had planes. It was a big production, not doubt the biggest production ever done in Chile. That's for one.
Right.
There hasn't been something like this. and I don't know if it's going to be, you know.
Right.
Was very huge, and we put a lot of attention, even without the resources, to the quality of the production values, you know, to the reconstruction, to the clothes, to
Yes.
the decoration, you know, to all that. We worked very hard at it. So it's not really a low-budget film.
No, that's
No, I don't think it. Of course, for what's a low budget and what's a high budget,
Right.
what's a $50 million movie. I mean, this is obviously a very low budget movie.
Right.
But what is important, I mean, in my opinion, when you succeed a low budget movie, is when all those flaws that are there somehow because you didn't have the money are not real flaws. They become somehow achievements.
Right.
You know, and if you look at it from an accounting point of view, from a very strict logistic point of view, the film, yes, it's low budget. The money was not there. Hey, wait a minute here. But from a dramatic point of view, and that's the sort of miracle of the drama, of the director, of how to do a movie, makes that all these holes are not holes that are black holes that were not leading nowhere, but there's more light coming through, and that sort of illuminates the movie in a better way. And that's a success, you know, the success of the magic of a low-budget, succeeded movie, and that's the director and the crew to put it together.
That's
There are
Although that's
not
think
many.
it's the central thing of this film, you know, the budget.
No,
Yeah.
not at all. I
no,
mean, the central thing of the film is I think what Sergio was suggesting is this dramatic feel about.
It's an epic film.
Yeah.
It's an epic film with epic dimensions, with an epic story, with epic characters, which are even. I won't call them characters in the traditional dramatic sense. They're even like paintings in a fresco, you know. That's why I think Miguel is very adequate in calling it a fresco. Jose Duran is not really a person. He's larger than life, and it's like a painting in popular iconography.
Right.
Every one of them, you know.
But that brings up, I think, a very important point about understanding how characters work in this film. I mean, if, as you were saying earlier, there's this aspect of neorealism about the film, then plus these magical elements. But, you know, in something like neorealism, we still have this very strong and consistent psychological identification with the characters, and they're psychologically developed characters. That's not the case in this film at all. That's not to say we aren't sympathetic with the characters at all. We are sympathetic. We follow them. We follow their actions. But they are real peasants, and they're allegorical characters.
Yeah.
They represent the people both at the time of this historical incident, but also the aspirations of the people.
And the cultural influences, you know, because I would say the cultural influences of the film are, you know, neorealism, which at that time was very important in Latin America, Garcia Marquez, Neruda, that means magical magical realism, and Brecht, which makes for the distance with the characters. Brecht was an immense influence in Latin American cinema at that time, and on all cinema, and Godard of the 60s, you know. Those were the influences of the time, and you can feel it in the way the film is constructed, you know, and the way the characters are designed and everything else. I think in that sense it's a good synthesis. That's why I say it's a synthesis of a moment,
Yeah,
you know, of Latin American film. And that's,
I think that there are many ways to. I'm not a critic, so I can't say this is good or bad or whatever. I would say that it reflects the way what people expected from a movie, what Littín wanted to achieve with his movie, what he thought that what people is going to do when they see this movie. Are they going to go out and I don't know, think differently?
Right.
Or are they going to... What did he want by doing this movie the way he did it? Because obviously this is a very sort of... this is a distant, symbolic movie, I would say.
Yes,
It is.
Definitely.
It is.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
It's not a movie that you fell in love with a character, or you like this woman, or it's not an erotic movie, although there's people naked. It's all very distant, you know.
Yes.
Was this something that Littín wanted or didn't want, or it happened in spite of himself? was he in total control of the means he was doing? Was he a creator
I think
at his
so.
maximum potential? I don't know.
I think he
I have
was
no idea.
I think he was, you know, if one has to, because I was assistant, so I know.
Right.
What he wanted was to create, you know, that what I said before, this fresco, and that's why you have the distance. To a fresco, you have to step away to see a whole thing, and that's can be the achievement of a film, can also be a weakness.
Right.
In this case, I do like, you know, the result, and I think Littín, you know, is probably satisfied with this film. The film was very well received after it was finished. Won the Prix Georges Sadoul in France, which was
Right.
Film of the Year, you know, was widely distributed. And I'm dying to see what happens tomorrow in Chile when we show it, you know.
Right,
Because
because there is that strange historical phenomenon, I mean, and political, alas, that this film will, when it is first shown in Chile, will be itself an historical document.
Exactly.
Because it was aimed, because one has the feel, when you're watching the film, that this is made for a particular audience at a particular moment. And of course, that
We have
audience
to-
in that moment have long...
Right. We have to see that. If the film lasts, it would be, you know, an achievement. If it is
right.
dated.
The movie sort of, that's the most important thing. I mean, that's because it doesn't matter if the movies, people thinks this or that. Well, it is important, but also it was done on in a certain period in the Chilean history.
Right.
That was picked up by an author, by a creator, and said, well, this is the way I see things. And somehow he's picking up the spirit of that period.
Well, we're going to have to end with this, which I think is a very good point to end, with this fact that we've just seen something that crystallizes a particular moment, a particular set of possibilities at a particular moment. If you'd like to continue with a few more moments of Cinema Then, Cinema Now with our series on Latin American cinema, drop us a line. We'll send you a schedule. Drop it to Cinema Then, Cinema Now, the College of Staten Island, Staten Island, New York, 10301. Let me give you that information again, okay? Drop it to Cinema Then, Cinema Now, the College of Staten Island, Staten Island, New York, 10301. Well, Sergio, thank you for bringing your expertise about this period and about the experience of a Chilean filmmaker.
Thanks a lot.
Andres,
Thanks a lot,
the
Jerry.
same to you for bringing your particular expertise on this particular film. Listen, I hope, as always, that our thought and discussion here lead you to thought and discussion at home that you enjoy. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers.